So, Jasper Bark, welcome to the House of Shadows and Ink.
Thank you very, very much. It is an honor to be here.
It's always a pleasure talking to you. We've
I
been
can't do so, my friend.
no, it's my pleasure for sure. We've been friends for many years now. Well, colleagues at first, friends now. We've actually met in person twice already, um, and just learned more about each other than normal colleagues do.
This is true. I believe I was the first non-South African writer to actually come and visit you.
That's correct. And that was
At the
amazing.
point, yeah,
That was still the early days of Crystal Lake.
I think you'd
That's
only had For the 90s Dark out. So, like, your,
mm,
I
very
suppose you would
first.
call it your second publication, because the first publication was your own work. Your little
Yes, I, I,
collection.
I didn't want to mess up someone else's book, so I tested mine first.
I still have a signed copy on my
Oh,
bookshelf behind me.
nice. Well, I still have your signed For the Night is Dark and your. It was a zombie book.
The Way of the
Um,
Barefoot Zombie.
that's it. Oh,
Wow.
very cool. Now I'm gonna treasure that forever. So basically, the House of Shadows and Ink. This is where we chat with creators,
Mhm.
authors, and I mean, you've worn many hats as a creative person. So this is like the perfect place for you. And I want to introduce you to everyone who's here on YouTube now, our TikTok page, everyone who's still to come, because you've got an amazing array of work. I'm, of course, a big fan. And I actually want to cover each one of those books. But let's start with just give everyone a quick summary, like a elevator pitch of who you are, what you've done, and what we're most likely going to talk about over the next hour or so.
I've been writing professionally just about my entire adult life. I would have been considered in the States a high school dropout. I left school at 16. I didn't effectively run away to join the circus, but I did actually get involved in the world of theatre from about the age of 18 onwards. That's where I first began to write for the stage. I segued from there into being a performance poet and a stand-up comedian. Lived a hand-to-mouth existence for about a decade doing that, and then started to find work as a journalist. I started writing about dissident politics, and then I moved into the much easier job of writing about film and music. Met a lot of very famous, highly creative people for a while. Decided that I had somebody else's dream job. Um, and so I moved first into the writing comics, and then from writing comics into writing novels. Moved out of London using the advance from my first novel to actually subsidize the move. Moved to the country. I thought I was going to sit in my study and think beautiful thoughts and gaze out across the rolling English landscape. Overlooked the fact that without two very good wages, we couldn't afford like full-time childcare and like a cleaner. So I found myself as a house husband, earning my way out of domestic drudgery. So had to very quickly get another writing job. Wrote my next couple of novels. Found out I was although I was writing quite consistently, I was making an okay living, close to what I'd made as a journalist. I was still doing a lot of hack work. My lovely wife, whom you've met, Ronnie, actually challenged me on this when I was wrangling over script for a game that I was writing, and the developers I was writing it for kept asking for the most stupid, pointless changes. And she just said, well, why are you wasting your time with all this writing? And I was going, money. And she said, I've never read anything I could point to and say, that is something only you could have written. This absolutely represents your voice and you, which was a bit of a blow to the heart. But she was right. And so I actually walked away from thousands and thousands of pounds worth of work to write and find what my voice was. And when I did, it turned out it was quite hideous. And possibly one of the earliest things I wrote that kind of captured that was for a anthology for my publishers, Abaddon Stroke Solaris, and they had a piece called End of the Line. And that short story worked really well for me. And then soon after, I was asked to submit to many different anthologies, one of which was for the 90s Dark. I got on really, really well with that particular publisher. And I'd written an absolutely horrific, terrible story based on an urban legend that I'd heard. And the story was called Stuck on You. And so I approached this particular publisher and said, are you at all interested? Thankfully, they were. And that began what is now probably a 12-year relationship, which brings me up to date. When I found my voice, I found that it was dark. It was highly imaginative. It does want to make comments about the world around us and about the state of the human condition. And I find that horror is the best place to do that. It's a great repository for my imagination. It's a great way to comment on the human condition and the state of reality as we know it, to be philosophical, to be metaphysical, and at the same time to be highly entertaining and to write really, really gripping fiction. If you pick up one of my books, expect the unexpected. One comment I get an awful lot in my reviews from professional critics or from just general everyday readers is I picked up this book and I thought within the first 10 pages, I know exactly where this is going. And then by the third chapter, I realized I had no idea. And there was no way I could have guessed how this book stroke story would have turned out. Expect to be wrong-footed, expect something that's wildly imaginative, expect to read something you actually haven't ever read before. And I know you might think, yeah, right. But please put me to the test. I can promise I will show you sights that your eyes have yet to see.
No, I agree 100%. And I actually
Thank you.
I have a comment for you on that.
Oh.
Let me just find it. There you go. And well deserved.
Thank you very much.
So yes, just Stuck on You. I still remember I was still at my day job, primary school teacher. I was sitting in the lounge area, where we take our mental breaks in between everything. And I was reading Stuck on You on my Kindle. I put it the Word document on there, and I had to read this to decide what are we going to do with it. And I just laughed out loud. I spat up my food. Everyone was watching. What is this guy doing? I'm reading Stuck on You by Jasper Bark. And when those Goodreads reviews came out, remember that? That was a trending topic kind of thing back then. I mean, that's before TikTok and all that stuff. Something actually trended on Goodreads, which was so cool.
Yeah, and the reviews were kind of that's the worst. This is the worst thing I've ever read. I love it. This is the worst thing I've ever read. I hate it. How could somebody do this? Yeah, I'm glad you laughed as well, because it's a shaggy dog story. It takes horror to its absolute absurd, ridiculous extremes, to the point that you're supposed to laugh. So it was supposed to turn you on. It was supposed to turn your stomach, and it was also supposed to make you laugh.
Yeah, I remember you actually had an erotic author help you with the sex scenes.
They certainly. I had a few people who read it in the early stages, and it was Lisa Jenkins, who I think she published under the name Lisa McCarthy, and she actually as well for a while ran an erotic imprint. She was one of my beta readers, and she gave me some fabulous feedback, which was really, really useful, because it did. I'd read a lot of really pulpy, very badly written horror, which often had ultra violence and a lot of sex in it. But the sex and violence are the two hardest things to write
Mm,
effectively. Partly because violence, on the one hand, is not something that we're exposed to in our day-to-day experience on an intimate level. And if we are, it's often so traumatic, it takes us ages to process and to write about. So effective. So often, we a lot of writers fall back into terrible metaphors, or they kind of slightly avoid it, or they fall back into cliches and things that they've seen in films and in footage, news
mm,
footage. And sex is very, very difficult to write. Mainly because we are exposing ourselves on the page. We're writing, we can't help it, about our own sexual experiences and our own sexual prowess. So it's very, very revealing. Knowing it's very revealing when you do this, again, people fall back into terrible similes. We're often embarrassed to speak about sex and sexuality very, very openly. So sex and violence, people always say, "Oh, anybody can write a book and throw in sex and throw in violence,
mm,
yeah, and make it a bestseller." But actually, they are far harder to write than anything else I find. So, Stuck on You was a challenge to myself to take to write very graphically about both, but at the same time to maintain a quality of prose, and to play with literary conceits and literary devices, while at the same time
mm.
very much being right down in the gutter in the really kind of pulpy end of fiction, which is another facet of my work, I think, without
Well,
being just
if if I can sum it up for people who haven't read it yet, let's just say two cheetahs get fused together by lightning. I think that's all we need to say there. Let the rest, what's the word, percolate a bit and go pick up the book. That was the best introduction that I could have had back then to your work.
thank you.
And that was the beginning of it all. Okay, talking about the beginning. So
Mhm.
because this the House of Shadows and Ink, it's about creativity, um, and imagination, and especially like you said, in like a world today where there's so many things that we can comment on in our work, but for the purposes of like this channel, I need horror and dark fiction, speculative suspense, murder mystery, whatever it is, to be an escape for people, as it should be. So this is a safe place where we can just come and be fans and creators of just this wonderful stuff that we love. So talking about creativity and just your imagination, take us way back to like a young Jasper. Where did it begin? What birthed this interest in just like the weird stuff? Was it always there? And how did you basically feed it?
Yeah. I think I think people are drawn to horror, and people who write horror really, really effectively are people who have dealt with so often some form of trauma in their lives, but people who are also very easily scared. I think I was quite easily scared as a child. And I did have very visceral and emotional reactions to stories, to words, and to images. So I remember being quite disturbed by a picture book about Jack and the Beanstalk. I remember my parents saying, "Oh, should we let him read this because he might be a bit scared?" And then insisting, "No, no, no, I won't be scared. I'd love to read this book. You've got to let me read it now." And then being quite scared and waking up in the middle of the night in a big tears, and my parents looking at me like I was in it. "Well, we told you. You shouldn't have read that book." I also recall when I was about 5 years old, like I was a huge comics fan and have been since before I can remember. And in the UK, there was an imprint called Marvel UK, which used to reprint the old American Marvel comics, usually a few years after they'd been over there in the States, in Britain in black and white. And in about 1975, they started reprinting The Tomb of Dracula, which was written by
Nice.
Marv Wolfman and drawn by Gene Colan. And I recall standing in a newsagent and turning over the pages of this and seeing Gene Colan's artwork in black and white. And the way he portrayed Dracula, he drew him as Jack Palance. And actually, that Jack Palance did eventually appear in a film directed by Dan Curtis. I think it was 1976. It's not a bad adaptation of Dracula, and Jack Palance is superb in it. But in 1973, when Gene Colan first began drawing Dracula as Jack Palance, Jack Palance had yet to actually play the part, and the the way he depicted Dracula was really quite horrific, and it absolutely terrified, and at the same time, utterly fascinated me as a child in the mid-70s. And from that moment on, I was really absolutely, utterly fascinated with depictions of horror and with horror comics. Even though I think that when the newsagent saw me as a very, very small boy reading this horror comic, I think they slapped the covers shut and kind of shooed me from the shop. But that, of course, probably only added more like gasoline
Mm.
to the flames, and I was totally fascinated. The first horror novel that I read, I would have been about 11 years old, and that was Psycho by Robert Bloch.
Oh,
And I
nice.
hadn't seen the film, partly because in those days I would only ever get to see it on television, and it would have been probably too late in the day for me to see it. So I hadn't actually seen the film. I knew nothing about the plot or the amazing twist at the end. So I sat down and read the novel and was utterly hooked. I fell in love with Bloch's writing. The ending totally blew me away. I really did not see it coming, and it completely rearranged my concept of not only the entire story, but what you could do with fiction. The way that you could tell a story in such a way for such
Mm.
an expanded period of time, take the reader on this huge journey, and then at the last minute pull the rug out from underneath them and make them reassess everything they'd read up until practically the last page. That was a lesson that I've never forgotten, and it's something I would hope carries over to my own work. I became obsessed with Robert Bloch, but in those days, there was no information superhighway, and there wasn't really any of Bloch's work in print at that point, the very beginning of the 80s,
Mm.
over here in the UK. So I used to haunt like secondhand bookshops. These called yard sales over in the States. Over here, we used to call them jumble sales. And thrift stores, we would call them charity shops, in search of loads of those. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there were an awful lot of anthologies of short horror stories with very
Mm.
garish covers. A plucked eyeball, kind of like sitting in a petri dish, or a mummified face rising out of the catacombs. And it would promise all sorts of scares within. And I would flick through these books in search of just a single story by Robert Bloch, because they were relatively cheap, and my pocket money would stretch to about 2 or 3 a week. And as I was collecting these books in order to read the Robert Bloch stories, because that was about the only way I could read anything else apart from the copy of Psycho I checked out the library, I began to come across other authors like Clark Ashton Smith, like his mentor, H.P. Lovecraft, of course, the works of Edgar Allan Poe, writers like Seabury Quinn and Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont. And so my understanding and education in classic horror expanded. And from there, I discovered writers like more contemporary writers like Ramsey Campbell and the amazing Lisa Tuttle and Carl Edward Wagner. And this was my education in horror. And I didn't know it at the time, but it would be far, far more useful to me than any of the supposedly classic books like Anthony Trollope or Thomas Hardy or Charles Dickens that I was forced to read in English
Mm.
literature class. As great as those writers are, and I would not diss them for a moment, the English teachers and the teachers in general who would curl their lip and turn their noses up at the lurid reading matter I was reading on the side, as well as these books and those authors, would go on to have a huge impact in my life. And those were incredibly important life lessons and also literature lessons that I picked up at the feet of those horror masters.
Yes, and I can still recall. I didn't read Robert Bloch before watching Psycho.
Mhm.
Well, I was born in 1980, so but I was so obsessed with the story that I had to find out more about him. And I also had one of those anthologies that you mentioned, and I saw there's a Robert Bloch story in there. So, and that was the first short story that I read from him before I even read Psycho. And I need to go find that story. It's somewhere in my shelves. That was an amazing. I was like, okay, this guy can write. Like, Psycho was not just because of Alfred Hitchcock. It's Robert Bloch all the way. Well, 80% of the way, I'd say.
Yeah, probably even a little bit more than that, actually. Not to detract from Hitchcock. Interestingly, this is maybe a controversial opinion with lots of people. I gave Psycho to read to my eldest daughter, and then some years later, with a bunch of her friends from university, and it has to say that she went to Cambridge, which is like Ivy
Mm.
League, like top rank university. I sat and showed the Blu-ray of Psycho to her and a bunch of her highly educated friends, all in, I think they were about 18, 19 at the time. And they were distinctly unimpressed. It hadn't, as a film, really stood the test of time. There were a lot of
Mm.
scenes, particularly the scene like where Arbogast falls down the stairs, that looked really, really hokey to them. And two of them had actually read the book, and the general consensus was the book had stood the test of time, but the film really hadn't. And it was Joseph Stefano who wrote the script, who also created the excellent Outer Limits TV program a couple of years later, or might even have been round about the same time. Outer Limits is what, 1961, 62? Psycho's
I'm
about,
not sure.
yeah, I'm not sure of the date.
62 Psycho, I
So
believe.
might have been, yeah, before, or it might have been just after. Outer Limits could have been about 63, 60, 62, 63. Anyway, he was a
Okay.
fabulous writer. His pedigree is amazing, but he had the good common sense to lift everything out the book. The entire story, scene by scene, is played out on the screen. The only thing he changed was in the book. Norman Bates is to use the Jewish term, he's a bit of a nebbish or a dweeb. He is a middle-aged, balding, overweight guy who's quite short. Whereas Stefano decided that he was going to make him into a handsome, charismatic character, and Hitchcock went along with that. And the casting of Anthony Perkins was absolutely perfect. That is the most important change that the film makes
Mm.
from the novel, and it works brilliantly within the context of the film. Probably far more so than if they'd cast him closer to what he was like in the book. Although in the book, the idea was that psychopaths aren't necessarily intensely charismatic and good-looking and charming. Sometimes they can be very homely individuals.
Mm. No, agreed. Okay, so we've got the early young Jasper. When did I know there was a time where you were even giving some ghost tours around London? I
It's
definitely
actually
want to
where I
hear
live
some of
in
that.
Haven.
Okay. And you
Yeah.
still do that?
I haven't for the last year or so. I was doing it in conjunction with a hotel and a bar in the centre of town, and they would do take all the bookings, and everybody would congregate and meet, and I'd take them for a walk around. I live in a very, very old medieval town. In fact, actually, it's been settled for about the last 5,000 years. There are settlements which go back to not only before the Romans were here. There's lots of old Roman buildings actually lying just beneath the ground, but they're before the Celts were on these shores. So before the Anglo-Saxons, before the Romans, before the Celts, as early as the Britons, we found old sites which date back even before the Iron Age, to the Bronze Age, and possibly to the Neolithic. So it's an ancient settlement in this little dale. It's a tiny little village. Some of the buildings here actually do go back to the mid Anglo-Saxon period, and they're still standing. There's quite a few medieval buildings, and anybody who's lived here for any period of time has a slightly strange supernatural story to tell. I've heard hundreds in the town because I became quite well known, and the ghost tours that I did were quite well attended. I did it for about a 12-year period. Yeah, everybody wants to come and tell me their slightly weird story, a lot of them could be explained by like just simple common sense. Yeah, that was a creaky floorboard. That was just a window. That was probably a reflection. But some were really quite fascinating, and you couldn't explain them away. And some I did include in my ghost tour.
Nice. Well, knowing what like a great ceremony, what do you call it, the monster of ceremonies you can be, I can just imagine going on a tour with you. And the two things I enjoy most about ghost tours are normally the history and the stories. Like
there's so much history in my
so
town,
much.
and I've been very lucky to have been very friendly with some local historians who've done some amazing work into digging into the history of Bradford-on-Avon. So I do hide a lot of history because it fascinates me, living in such there's such an ancient settlement. So yes, and of course the stories, and it's interesting to kind of put one or two pieces together, and to build a much larger narrative out of individual experiences, and to like stretch it across time with some of the research that I've done and that other people have also educated me about.
No,
And
that's
also, I used to be stand-up, so it's also fun as well. Horror and humor are incredibly close as genres, very, very similar. So anything horrific has to have a little bit of horror in it, which, of course, a lot of my
for sure.
ghost walks used to.
So what came first, the stand-up or I think like journalism? You did some big interviews for, was it BBC?
I did work for the BBC, but I worked for the BBC as a scriptwriter, mainly on BBC Radio. They still have a big drama department, and a lot of the comedy shows, like everything from early days like Monty Python all the way through to big name comedians today. Many of them start out on BBC Radio with radio shows. I used to write sketches for BBC Radio. It was the stand-up that started first, and then I got into scripting and writing for the BBC and for other sketch shows, often on stage. One or two tiny pieces for cable television, and I made lots of Blink and You'll Miss Me appearances on TV, and I kind of segued into journalism as a way to make a less hand-to-mouth living. I was living sometimes from gig to gig, and scrabbling for pennies underneath the sofa to make the rent that month quite frequently. And so journalism was a way to, initially speaking, to bolster that. And then I looked into getting quite a good job. And got to be honest with you, actually, I had no qualifications and absolutely no contacts. In a profession where it wasn't what you knew, it was who you knew. So I just made it my point to know people. And I did absolutely blag and bullshit my way into jobs. And by the time anyone thought to perhaps challenge me on all of my bullshit, I'd got enough of a CV and a resume to fall
True.
back on. And enough work in print with some top national publications that I was unassailable. But yeah, if you watch films like The Talented Mr. Ripley or Catch Me If You Can, where these guys who bullshit themselves into situations that they really shouldn't be in, that was very much my kind of early career as a journalist. I totally talked my way into positions that I had no reason to fill. But then I did the same thing in theatre, and I did the same thing with stand up as well. Um, I have to say that these days I'm far more honest. But this is, as I said, because I now have a large resume and a huge body of work behind me, so I
Mm.
no longer need to do that. And also, perhaps I've attained a little bit more maturity and ethics and principles.
Well, we are the culmination of everything that's happened to us and that we've done. So even thinking back to like the times that you really struggled, um, they've helped. I mean, I know it sounds terrible, but we become. It's like a diamond. Like it.
Yeah.
It just keeps chipping away until a diamond. The diamond shines. Whatever they say.
Yeah,
Uh,
and writing has always been therapy. It's always been a form of consolation. It's often been a place I've gone to hide from the pain in my life. And certainly, as a very young man, I had bouts of homelessness and sofa surfing and hustling, and getting involved in nefarious activities that sometimes put me in dangerous and questionable situations. And I must admit, my one consolation whenever I was down or had my back against a wall or found myself in a terrible situation was that at the back of my mind, I thought one day I will write about this. And for
mhm.
some reason, that always made me feel a lot better. And certainly, I think because I've always written really from about the age of 5 years old, written down stories. I think there was a point in my late teenage years I was aware that my ability to write about things far outstripped the actual life experience that I had, and that there seemed to be a shortfall. I could write, but I had nothing kind of. People say write what you know, which is a absolutely nonsensical load of old claptrap, particularly if you're a highly imaginative individual. But
Mm.
I didn't have very much that I knew that I could write about to draw upon. So um, I would say that not writing is not only a consolation in very, very hard times, but the hard times did eventually provide me with a huge wealth of experience to draw upon as a
Mm.
writer.
And where did the theater come in? Like, what age? Where in the story does it fall in?
Oh, I think I was always showing off, and standing up and standing out, and being. I grew up in a very blue collar, working class, rural environment where it wasn't particularly safe to be the sort of individual who stood out. Certainly not one who was precociously intelligent, um, and happened to be eloquent, who read too much and had a very large vocabulary. So this made me prey for a lot of bullying from not really my peers who I could deal with, but adults as well, who thought I was getting above my station and thought I was
Mm.
cleverer than them, which, I was. I've got an above mental level IQ. But there you go. But it was challenging to those people around me, and I would get out of difficult, violent, potentially damaging situations by making people laugh, by being humorous, by doing silly voices, by acting things out for people. And I got involved, in school drama and then in amateur dramatics in the area where I lived. Um, and as I say, it was round about the age of 18 that I bullshitted my way into a theatre job. And also there's a time honored way that a lot of people get into the stage. And I certainly, having very few morals as a young man, was happy to indulge people slightly older than me, but always with equally questionable morals, and that opened doors for me. And I, so from the age of about 18, 19 onwards, I was working in professional theatre in a variety of capacities, mainly as a performer, but also I learned to write. And by the age of about 20, I was actually involved in a theatre arts cooperative and getting a regular income from it. So I'd gone from a period of about 17 of being technically homeless by 20, actually being part of a, a, a paying theatrical venture. And it was there actually doing that I met my wife, Ronnie, at a very young
Oh,
age.
cool. I was gonna ask that. When did she come in to save you?
Yes, and save me
Mm.
she did. I am certainly one of those men who was definitely saved by the love of a good woman, an amazing human being, in
Mm.
fact. Uh, so yeah, I was about 20, and I was working with this theatre arts cooperative in a very northwestern town called Carlisle. We just got to the point where we'd got funding from the local city council, the county council, and back in those days, there were actually lots of grants for doing artistic things. This is the very beginning of the 90s, 1990. So we had some money from the Northwest Arts, which was a funded arts body, which took taxpayers' money and gave it to artistic pursuits. Even though we're all extremely young and highly idealistic,
Mhm.
we were actually getting this money. And Ronnie was studying at the local art college, and she'd gone to a very posh private school. We come from completely opposite ends of the social spectrum. Her family are royalty. Her uncle is a duke. Her mother was a lady. Her cousins are princes and princesses. She'd gone to a really posh fee-paying school. We would say public school here in the UK. You'd say private school everywhere else. She went to this very posh all-girls school, and her only real escape was doing artistic things. So she went to go and do a year's foundation course in art, and discovered that she could neither paint nor draw. And they actually said to her, "Look, we don't want to fail you, but you're not going to succeed in this course, and we don't want to lose the fees that we get for having you here. So we're supposed to offer drama, but we haven't actually got anyone to teach it on this curriculum. So if you go and find something dramatic to do and come back with some proof that you've done it, we'll give you an unconditional pass." And it just so happened that I was involved
Wow.
in a performance at that particular art college with a guy called Keith Tyson, who would go on to win the Turner Prize, and he's now married to a Murdoch. And we were doing a performance at the art college, and Ronnie came and said, "Can I join in and do something here?" And she and I became best friends, eventually fell in love, and Keith ended up being the best man at our wedding.
Oh, that's a brilliant story. I don't think I've heard your story yet of how you met. Oh, and I actually wanted to ask you, like, you need to tell me something today that I don't know about you. So that's very cool. I thought I knew everything. Okay, so let's jump into the world of comics and your oh, what do you call it again? Your comic book room here at the House of Shadows and Ink.
Um,
Bark Bites Comics.
Bark Bites
Yes.
Comics.
So
I
tell
don't
us where
literally bite
your
comics.
passion for comic books began and what your plans are for Bark Bites Comics.
I think my father, who's no longer with us, used to tell a story about how uh, he and I went out for a walk. I would have been about 2, 3 years old, and he came back with a kids comic for me. And my mum, who uh, grew up in the 40s and 50s when comics were supposed to be an absolute blight on the nursery,
Mm.
was appalled that my father had given her Darling Boy something as terrible as a comic. And my dad said, "Oh, don't worry about it." He said, "I'll have them for a couple of years, then I go out them. I'll never read one again," which was probably the worst prediction anyone ever made about my life. I fell in love with comics when I was actually pre-literate. Always loved comics, always loved reading them. Knew from a very early age, as soon as I worked out that obviously somebody had drawn and somebody had written these comics, that I would be involved creatively with comics.
Mm.
When I was about 5 years old, I was watching television. There was a program on the BBC, which was very patrician in those days. And this program was called Why Don't You? And actually, the full title of the program was Why Don't You Turn Off Your Television Set and Go and Do Something Less Boring Instead? And the whole point of the program was to actually show you a whole group of children who were doing things far more interesting than watching television, to
Mm.
encourage you to stop watching television. You would never be able to pitch a program like this to the program makers of today. But that was this program, and it would show you children who were stamp collecting, who were clog dancing. It was a very boring, incredibly worthy program. But one episode I watched, and I was about 5 years old, involved a group of kids who were making their own comics. They were taking blank sheets of paper, folding them in half, stapling them together, and then drawing with felt tip pens. And honestly, I had never seen anything quite so exciting in my life before. I was like, I've got paper, I've got felt tip pens, my mum's got a stapler. I can make my own comic. It's like, ah. And from there on in, I think I spent most of my waking hours drawing comics. In fact, actually, Christmas 1976, my parents had to actually confiscate the paper and all of my pens. So I would stop drawing comics and come and open the presents I'd been bought on Christmas morning. That's how obsessed I was
Wow.
with creating. It turns out I am an absolutely, utterly talentless artist. I have no talent for drawing whatsoever at all. So I think it was about 1981, 1982. There was a comic strip, which is still going today, called 2000 AD, which I've also written for
Yeah.
myself. And they published I think it's available over in South Africa. You probably had it growing up as well. They
Yep.
published a script by the writer John Wagner, and they actually showed you how you lay out a comic script and how you wrote it. This was massively influential on many, many comic writers from my generation and for the generation before me as well, who were like, oh my God. And at that point, I stopped drawing comics because I have no ability to draw comics and began writing comic scripts. And of course, but I was also writing short stories as well by that point
Mm.
too. So my love of comics has been a lifelong affair, really, I think. And my need to write comics and talk about them the same, I would say. And yeah, and of course, probably my favorite genre is unsurprisingly horror. And so I love horror. I love comics. I'm gonna love horror comics.
Perfect. Well, when you mentioned now the what was it, the show called Why Don't You?
Why don't you? Yeah.
Yes, that is exactly the pitch that I gave myself when I thought of the idea of the Eddie Poe show, the YouTube channel. It's like, how can we get the kids on YouTube and teach them about books? Like, we're going to get them on YouTube and we're going to introduce them to the world of
Yeah.
books. And
Put
then
down the
up
screen.
to
Look at a book.
Jasper's books. So I mean, luckily I didn't have to sell the show. It's our show, but still.
Can I also say as well, very recently, a group of scientists looked at the neurological impact of too much exposure to social media, and they wired up brains of prepubescents, adolescents, and also young adults to see exactly what's happening, to measure
Mm.
the synaptic activity of the brain while we're scrolling. And of course, what they discovered was there's far too much of a dopamine overload, which because of the brain's need for hypostasis, this is like a need for balance. The brain then has to release chemicals to counteract the high of the dopamine, like cortisol, which is the fight or flight drug, but it's also like brings the mood right down. And so it was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that not only was it absolutely shortening attention spans to dangerous levels, to levels that would people with like advanced ADD in average people who probably weren't in the least bit neurodivergent, if there's anyone really who isn't neurodivergent. And they're also discovering that it definitely has a verifiable and measurable impact upon mental health, um, and particularly for long periods of time that
Mm,
people scroll. This is absolutely proven. However, in the course of doing these examinations, they discovered there is one thing you can do for 10 minutes every day, which will completely reset the wiring in your brain and undo all of the damage that's been done by scrolling through your screen. And that is to pick up a book and to read for just 10 minutes. Just
mm.
10 minutes
Thought
will
so.
completely undo all the damage you've done on social media.
Oh,
So,
that's brilliant.
which is like, it is brilliant. And obviously, it's so you can imagine, I repeatedly remind my children of this fact
Mm,
to the point where they're sick of hearing me say it. But um, it's also a superb thing you're doing with the Eddie Poe show to encourage kids to put down their screens to pick up a book
mm,
for just 10 minutes. Hopefully, I mean, obviously, because you and I are bibliophiles and we're also both authors and involved in publishing, we want them to read for more than 10 minutes, but just 10 minutes
mm.
every day be a superb thing. So it's an incredibly important thing you're doing with the Eddie Poe show.
Oh, thanks. Well, luckily, Kaylee, you've met Kaylee, our
Hmm.
6-year-old. She loves reading, but
Yes.
she can now finally read. And but I catch her every now and then just dropping the story and continuing on. She just goes in her own direction, and she actually, the moment she picks up speed, I know she stopped reading, and she tells us her own story, and I let her go. Like, I leave her, because for me, that like imagination, that journey she goes on, is even better than the actual story. So this is like the best practice. And she was starting to
Absolutely.
get a bit addicted
Hmm.
to like being on a phone, and we've been a bit stricter now. We limit the like number of hours only to weekends, and she has to, like, get up for school and behave herself and get dressed and all that stuff to win extra hours for the weekend. But since she's been on the phone less, she's much better behaved. Like, if she's on there
Yeah.
too long, it's like she's frustrated. She wants to scream. She doesn't know how to like handle normal situations. It's terrible what the phone can do. And now here's my question. You
Hmm.
you were talking about the like synapses in the brain and stuff. With people using AI to solve their problems these days, how many years, and there's going to be tests before those parts of our brain deteriorate and we can't even make normal, like, solve a basic equation anymore or something?
Yeah. It's a tough thing.
Problematic.
It's a tough thing. Um, Throughout our lifetime, we've seen the introduction of technology, and it's always this double-edged sword
Mm, always.
because it does free up certain parts of our brain to concentrate on certain things by doing um, tasks. And initially speaking, these tasks were the drudgery, they were the
Mm,
learned skills, they were the repetitive things. As AI gets smarter and smarter and smarter, the worry is that well, we know full well now it's able to outthink, to outcompute, and sometimes to outconceptualize the human brain. But the danger is that we become infantilized. This
mm,
begins really when we stop reading maps when we go off on a journey, and we depend entirely upon the screen. First, it was a sat nav. Now everybody's phone and console in their car dashboard has some form of satellite navigation built into it. So it tells us where to drive, and we forget how simple things like reading a map, like learning
mm,
directions, like learning how to interact better with our environment. We walk around, even the home cities or towns in which we live, often with the screen in front of us, having that tell us. So we lose the same connection and interaction we have with our environment. That ability is being taken away to such a degree that people's sense of direction, their ability, we used to have as human beings an innate sense that this street's probably over there, or that landmark's over there, or at this particular time of day, the sun isn't this thing, so I walk in this direction, I know I'm going to hit roughly this direction. That natural innate sense, which is like an innate part of our brain, is operating and functioning less. People have got a rubbish sense of direction because we've outsourced the whole thing to a phone. AI is doing the same thing as we increasingly get AI to do research for us. We're not really learning anything, and we're not really
Mm,
necessarily maybe maintaining that information because it's not been hard won, because we've not had to go out and find that information, reading a book, talking to a person, compiling, making notes. It's all put there in front of us. We don't necessarily hold and retain that information, and maybe it doesn't touch us at the deeper level of that innate learning which changes our life. We don't
true.
know this yet because this is very early stages of an intense revolution in human knowledge. But in placing all these skills in the hands of a machine that can do them much better than us, we're losing vital parts of our humanity, and we're becoming more and more infantilized. We are more and more like small children in the hands of electronic parents who are doing everything for us.
Mm.
Um, if you think about the all of those characters aboard the spaceship, I believe it's in the film Wall-E, who are very large, overweight, obese people carried around in pods who can no longer use their human bodies
Yes.
as well because technology is all for them. We kind of we foresaw that as a potential happening in the future, but we're not looking at the fact that intellectually we may be becoming very, very large,
Mm.
overweight, obese, and unable to do simple basic functions because we're being carried around intellectually, we're carried around mentally by robots that are doing it all for us. And that's the danger of
And
AI.
these um, basic skills, I mean, just like direction, that was survival instinct. That was
Oh,
part of your, like, to survive. Like, you had to find your shelter when you were in danger. You had to know which way to go to find your home before dark and all that stuff, and or way to find food and make it back safely. And so, what happens the next time you're in danger and you have no problem solving skills left? Like, and you're just standing there frozen because it is your fight or flight part of your brain.
yeah. I
Scary.
don't know. It is
Mm.
the simple answer. I don't know. Will we still have those instincts? I mean, the utopian view is that AI will free us up and it will allow us to make huge advances because again, a lot of the drudgery, the time you would spend learning that
Mhm.
information, collating that information, analyzing it, and crunching the numbers can now be done in seconds. Whereas previously, it would perhaps take us years to reach those points. So perhaps there's the possibility that we will make huge, great strides and advances in knowledge and in human potential that we
Mm.
wouldn't be able to before because we've freed up vast parts of our brain. It's worth saying that so our lifetimes, technology has actually freed up a lot of talent and a lot of application,
True.
particularly for the higher level people uh, that previously has been bogged down by simple everyday tasks.
Definitely.
Perhaps AI will do that. Perhaps um, the two things will be happening simultaneously. We'll be becoming more and more infantilized on the one hand, and on the other hand, some of us, those of us who can interact perhaps best or most effectively with AI, will continue to develop to a level that wasn't possible for any of
Mm.
our forebears.
That's what I'm hoping as well.
Yeah,
And
at some point, I do think human activity will split off into like non-digital pursuits and digital
mm,
pursuits. We will have like stamps, marks, and qualities of approval that this work was created entirely without the aid of any AI. This I actually read all this. I didn't do any research. I didn't do any composition. I didn't even spell check it with the use of AI, and that will become a mark, of badge of honor. And some people will only read those things written entirely
mm,
without AI, and it'll become like artisan baking, artisan coffee
true.
making, arts and crafts making. Quite a precious, treasured part of human existence. and the rest of us will interact with stuff that's been made, with AI to varying degrees. I also think as well that phones and screens are going to become like the new smoking. We will begin to see it as an addiction. We will begin to understand the huge impact it's having upon our mental and physical health. And people will go cold turkey. People will give it up. People will have digital cleanses. And there will be public spaces that will be digital free.
Mm,
There will be seats in the cinema where you will not be allowed to use your phone to sit there and tweet every 30 seconds if something happens on screen and really piss off everyone else sitting around you,
mm,
or take screenshots or film it from the seat. Phones will be banned from certain areas in public life for this reason as well.
mm.
Um, this is all coming. It's relatively quick in the future. In the meantime, we're stumbling along, learning how to navigate this entire landscape. And a lot of us will be told how to navigate it, unfortunately, by AI, which is probably the worst tool for doing so. But there you go.
Mm. Well, in a perfect world,
Hmm.
not that work hours like influences creative people like us. Anytime I get freed up, I just replace it with the next project. But let's say you work from 8 till 5, 9 till 5, whatever. In a perfect world with AI there, you should now work from 9 to 3 or 8 to 3 and have more time to pursue other things and spend with your family, whatever. So then I think that would be a nice balance, because then we have more quality of life. AI help people because or like 4 work days a week, that kind of thing. So fingers crossed for that. But yeah.
Yeah, that will be a good outcome.
Mm,
And I think it would be very unwise to just be entirely a doomsayer and to see that this is just the
mm.
harbinger of Skynet and the rise of the digital overlords oppressing us all. But on the other hand, as well, I think we should be equally skeptical of buying into the utopian visions of people like Sam Bankman,
Mm.
yeah, and those other individuals, Mark Zuckerberg and so, who think it's going to provide us with this digital utopia. I think there will be uses for AI, and there will be uses for AI.
True. Okay, so let's dive back into your books. That was actually written by a real person.
With no
Let's
AI. Hmm.
Yes, let's start with Dead Scalp. So tell us a bit about Dead Scalp and how that got got
That
made.
was it was actually while I was writing How the Dark Bleeds, which was the first short story I wrote for you. And I was lying in bed with a really bad case of the flu, and I had a ridiculously high temperature. And I have to say, I actually really quite enjoy fever dreams
Mm,
because I
same.
do absolutely trip balls. There was one occasion I had a really bad case of like gastric flu. And I stumbled out of bed at about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I sat down on my toilet bowl. And then for whatever reason, I was utterly convinced that I was actually Harold Wilson, who was the Labour Prime Minister of Great Britain in the mid 60s. And he used to smoke a pipe and have a very fake working class accent. And I was utterly convinced that I was Harold Wilson sitting on the toilet in number 10 Downing Street. And literally the entire, and because members of my wife's family are like in the House of Lords and stuff, I've actually been to kind of like the Houses of Parliament. So I kind of knew what it looked like, and my bathroom around me completely transformed the bathroom at number 10, and I was holding this imaginary pipe in my mouth, and I also had my hand on the toilet brush, and I was convinced that these actually were like levers, and the whole future of the 20th century appeared in front of me like a giant like serpent whose scales were kind of like the hours and minutes of the world to come ahead of me, and that by moving the pipe in one direction and moving the toilet brush in the other, I could actually guide the direction of the future of the 20th century. Um, um, I don't think if that I did a particularly good job. really, as Harold Wilson in that moment. But that was the kind of like very bizarre things that I do hallucinate when I am in that state. And to get back to Dead Scalp, there was a reason for saying all this, because I was at one point I had an intense high fever and I began to hallucinate. And it was one of those hallucinations where I'm not actually actively involved. I am like a fly on the wall, like an omniscient kind of like person watching this. And then my entire bedroom, and I was lying there with my laptop on my lap, disappeared. And it became a saloon in a bar in the Old West. And there was this kangaroo court going on. All the men were standing around. They all had like huge bushy beards. And they were trying this particular individual. And they found him guilty. And then rather than take him out and hanging, they were going to do the worst thing you could possibly do with a person. And they produced this cutthroat razor and they held up his mustache. And he was begging them, please, please, please put a bullet in my brain, hang me, anything, but do not take off my mustache. And I was thinking, the hell is... Why wouldn't he want to take off his mustache? And they shaved off his mustache and he was screaming, shoot me, please shoot me. And they walked to behind the bar and hanging up on the bar were all these wanted posters with all these kind of like individuals who'd been sitting in the saloon, all with real life mustaches glued to them. They put the two blobs of glue on the mustache they'd just shaved off this guy and stuck it on his wanted poster that was sitting behind the bar. And meantime, they're dragging him out and he's begging them to kill him. And at which point my wife probably came in to make certain that I wasn't like attempting to guide the future of like the 21st century with a bog brush and a pipe in my mouth. And the kind of the vision dissipated in front of me. But I had this weird lasting feeling that I'd seen out the window that that the street was entirely barren. There was no vegetation, but human hair had been growing up out of the ground like grass and up the side of buildings like creepers. And this, I was like, the hell is happening here? It stayed in my head long after I'd finished the story and that I wrote for you. And I kind of filed it away as like, there's something really strange going on here, and I would like to know just exactly what it is. And so after I'd written Stuck on You for you, and you'd suggested that it should come out as an ebook, and then we bring it out as the lead story in a collection of stories, I realized that I needed a couple of extra stories to pad out this collection. And I decided I would sit down and finally write this weird vision and try and work out what was happening and why it was happening and what all this was going on. And without like detracting from the madness or trying to rationalize any of the madness, but certainly to place it with the context of a fictional framework that explained everything without taking away from the sheer lunacy of what I'd seen. In fact, actually, I would say what I came up with then actually adds to the lunacy.
For sure.
I have a capacity, even when I'm not tripping balls on a kind of like 102 plus fever, to slightly unhinge my imagination. I always think of those not boa constrictors, those pythons that can cobras, or I think cobras are pythons that can unhook their jaws. So they can massively expand the things so that even though, you know, their bodies are about this big, they can actually unhook their jaws to the degree that they can even swallow baby chimps, you know, or like small like mammals. And there's a capacity. It's like I concentrate incredibly hard on something, and it's like I unhook or unhinge the jaw of my imagination, and then just let it kind of like open to the degree that perhaps most of the people's consciousness doesn't, perhaps just, and it's that moment of like, okay, let's go unhinged here for a minute. Let's kind of peel back the curtain of reality. Let's peel back the meniscus of our consciousness and open ourselves up to bizarre cosmic forces that otherwise human consciousness isn't capable of perceiving. For a brief moment, because obviously to kind of like entirely live in that space would send you bark mad.
There's a place for those individuals.
Yeah, and let's put it so I could just for a few minutes, and then kind of
Mm,
let's kind of bring in the
nice.
kind of weird cosmic forces, and then we'll create the gem of an idea and drop it in the petri dish of my imagination, and then kind of grow it into a story, which is what I did. I sound very, very grandiose, and if you've never read my work, you probably think I'm absolutely full of shit. So please go and read my work, and then you'll probably come back and go, "Well, you definitely are full of shit, Jasper, but it's good shit." It's
Well,
the good shit we like, and so let's. I think you'll appreciate that.
well, I can say, um,
Mm.
for those who are not familiar with Dead Scalp, hair plays a big role. So when you said you were sitting on the toilet and you were imagining, I thought you were going to say shitting air.
No, that
S-
slightly kind of comes into it. Yeah, that was
that's where
just an
I thought
example
this
of like.
story idea came from. But yes, this is why I love, and I've always loved, the weird horror,
Mm.
dark fiction, whatever you want to call it, supernatural, because there's no limits. I mean, you can go anywhere. You can, and I mean, depending if it's like flash fiction or like a very short story, you don't even have to explain what's going on. You don't have to explain what the rules of this world or what world it actually is. It's like someone is experiencing it and you're going along for the ride. And it's just amazing. And no other genre really allows for that. I mean, you've got some aspect of it in science fiction, maybe some urban fantasy, but it's just not the same. Well, I've even read some amazing sci-fi and urban fantasy, and that's what I just love about the imagination and stories. There are no rules. There's no there doesn't have to be gravity and walls and all that. It's like, what's on the other side of the wall? Like,
I think it was Lovecraft who said, I think one of the largest fears is fear of the unknown, and certainly that's a very atavistic fear back in the days when the unknown contained for us
mm,
as species a lot of potential threat and danger. But also, the imagination is an intensely subversive sense. Um, uh, William Blake, the 18th century poet, called the Queen of all the senses. And it's like the bridge between this world and the numinous. But the wonderful thing about subverting the world as we know it is that's quite a disturbing thing for many people,
mm,
challenging the reality of people's perceptions of the world, challenging all the known truths that we have, and extending the possibilities for them scares a lot of people because it pushes us out into unknown territory. But that for me has always been the most attractive thing about horror. That moment in so many cosmic horrors or even horror when the scientist affects the strange new machine that they've created that opens a portal between this world and the next. And they stand there absolutely laughing, cackling with the sheer glee of having extended the boundaries of human knowledge and experience. And yet, usually after that, unfortunately, it all goes absolutely tits up, and usually they're torn apart by a large multidimensional tentacular being, or many tentacled like entity. However, for me, the kind of the sheer exhilaration of standing there going, I have found it. Oh, if you could but see what I see. And always hugely appealed to me.
mm.
And so the stories I write don't necessarily have the same type of kind of like comeuppance for that. In fact, I try and put you inside the head of the person who's seeing that and to illustrate you for a very brief moment, to pull the scales away from your eyes and perhaps pull back the apertures of reality just a little to let a new reality sneak in.
No, that's perfect. So if I have to look at everything we've discussed now, with the journey that you've been on, the comic books, the everything, you actually have written sort of like a culmination of everything that you've gone through in a series of books that I would say draw you in is, I want to your life story, your like, this is your opus, whatever you want to call it, in my opinion. So tell us about Draw You In, like, because that is a very difficult book or series to describe. Like,
Um,
I can't find an elevator pitch for it. And I was actually thinking about it today because we want to pitch it to, like, for movies and series and stuff. But how
wow.
do you sum it up in like a paragraph? Like, I can't.
Uh, yeah. Well, it's hard to say. It is it's a paranormal conspiracy thriller, um, set against a backdrop of the history of American horror comics from the 1950s right the way up to the present day. And it's not just the history of the horror comics, it also covers the secret history of the United States. And it also actually uncovers the secrets of reality itself and the cosmos. And once you get to the end, most of those secrets will be yours, for the taking. It does stand up to repeated rereads. It begins with a middle-aged comic creator called Linda Corrigan, whose career is kind of on the skids. 10 years before, she was absolutely riding high as one of the latest, hottest young artists. Now, as happens with a lot of people, sadly, in the comics industry, her phone has stopped ringing. She's no longer getting the top
Mm.
jobs that she used to. The main major publishers, mainstream publishers, aren't touching her, and she's eking out a living in the really big indie publishers. And she's at a convention, and whereas maybe 5 or 6 years before, she'd have been on the main stands with big queues of people waiting to get her signature. Now she's sitting in what's called Artist Alley, selling her small independently published work. When an old editor, who's like one of the biggest names in the comic industry, turns up and invites her to one of the after-hour parties that take place in these conventions, which are the place where every single artist wants to get to, because this is where all the editors will be, all the movers and shakers in the industry, and this is really where you get all the work and you get the big breaks for your career. He invites her back to those. This could mean the vamping of her entire career. So she turns up at the event only to find that her name is not on the door. She's not allowed in. But not only that, but nobody seems to know this big name mover and shaker that she's talking about. And she feels very, very hurt by this, very humiliated, can't understand why he would pull such a horrible trick on her. And she comes back to the con in search of him to have a go at him. Why would you treat me in this way? Why would you embarrass me like that? I've never been so shoddily treated. And she finds that not only can she not find him, but she can't find anyone who even knows what she's talking about. She discovers that not only has his entire internet presence completely disappeared, but every book that she knows he worked on, his name is no longer on that. She goes to see colleagues that she's worked with, some of whom are actually real life, actual comic legends, who appear in the novel as themselves. Even they don't remember. So she goes in search of him, and she could find that he's not just disappeared; he's completely been wiped from existence as we know it. And she even goes as far as actually searching out his mom, it's an American way, to find out what's happened to him. And she says, "I've never had a son. I've no idea what you're talking about." She thinks that Linda is pulling a horrible prank on her. Linda also goes to make a missing persons report with the NYPD, and they basically say, "Look, because you've had a few mental health issues in the past, we're not going to press charges, but we should for wasting police time." So she's in this strange situation where she seems to be the only person who remembers reality as it was before something strange happened and wrote somebody out of reality altogether, which is a very lonely and very isolating situation to find herself in. She remembers the world as it was. She's convinced nobody else does, and she can't work out why. And as she leaves the police station feeling utterly despondent, she bumps into an agent for the FBI. And it turns out that he has also worked on a missing persons case that's identical to Linda's, where somebody who he knows full well has existed suddenly disappears from reality altogether. No one else remembers, even though he's been working this case for 6 months by the time this person disappears. And the one thing that connects both Linda's case and his case, and this is what flagged, he set out various different feelers out to listen for this one little red flag, was that both cases are connected by a forgotten comics genius called R.L. Carver, who was so talented. He was too talented to actually work in the industry, and he was marginalized not just by his race, he was African American, but also by the fact that he was probably the most talented artist of his time, and so far ahead of his time, we've yet to catch up with him. And in order to find out what's going on behind these two cases and explain this inexplicable series of events, they go in search of R.L. Carver. And because he's such a marginal figure, this is not easy. They join up with a comics historian who also runs an alt conspiracy website. And he's also a brilliant horror comics historian. And the three of them go in search of R.L. Carver. And as they research R.L. Carver's life, they also learn about the history of horror comics from the 1950s to the present. And this is where they begin to uncover a huge network of conspiracy and secret history that totally rewrites everything we think we know about American history and America as a nation. And also, that's when we delve into the truth of reality as we think we know it and as it actually is. And they take a huge road trip throughout the United States, exploring all kinds of strange, weird subcultures. And every single place they actually visit, and every venue they turn up at and stop and have a drink in actually exists. Although I don't necessarily name them all. At the time of writing, those places that exist all over America. And the other thing you can say about it is, in the same way that if you were to pick up like a big, it's nearly close to 1,000 pages long. If one of those wonderful 1,000-page long anthologies, you'll get on the horror, you'll get all kinds of different subgenres of horror, from folk horror to psychological horror to cosmic horror, to body horror, in each individual story. This is a completely connected through line of a story, but it also, as well as journeying through the entire United States and their history, it takes a journey through every individual subgenre of horror. So it kind of starts out as as like a Twilight Zone style piece of quiet horror, and it's slowly over the course of each individual 3 novels, it mutates into genre after genre after genre, right in front of your eyes.
And this took you how many years?
Oh, I thought it was going to be about 100,000 words. I pitched it to you as one novel, 100,000 words, kind of like done and dusted, 6 months. I'll hand it in to you. And I remember it took me about 9. I confess, actually, I sat down and wrote another novel that I'd wanted to write before I started writing it. So I kind of blew your first deadline. So sorry about that. And then when I eventually, you were about to just publish that novel that I wrote.
We'll get to that one in a bit.
We'll get to that one in a moment. Draw You In. I wrote it, and it was about 200,000 words, and I got to the end of it, and I realized it wasn't one novel, it was 3. So I had to kind of go back to you very politely and say, I've not just blown this deadline, but
it's going to be worth it.
It's going to be 3. Yeah, I had to keep telling you, it's going to be worth it. I promise you it'll be worth it. And you were really wonderful about actually giving me all that space. And it's one of those novels as well. The second draft, it grew into over like 300,000 words. So it grew massively. And I had to keep going back and redrafting. By the time I got to the end of the second draft, I knew what the story looked like, but I knew there were whole bits that need masses of work. So I had to go right back to the beginning again. It was kind of like building a mountain out of Lego that was like miles high, and getting to the top and realizing I was going to have to climb all the way down and then dismantle the mountain I'd built and then rebuild it again. But I was about 2 years into it when I realized it was going to take me two more drafts and some significant rewriting. That was difficult and emotionally quite draining because I'd lived through this. I'd just
Mm.
sat down 8 hours a day writing this for years, and then realizing it's not quite there yet. Still needs a bit more work. And in the meantime, I have to keep kind of like being in contact with you. I'm still working on this. I promise you. Um, so yeah, I think it ended up being about 3 years before I like handed it over to you. Like, it's done. You won't believe this. You might have forgotten. I even said I would do this, but look, I really have been working on it all this time.
Yes. Now, I still believe that that story is going to find a lot more readers out there. And for
I
anyone
hope so.
listening now, Draw You In is it's at a completely different level to, let's say, Stuck on You. Um, both equally good, but it's different vibe, different feel, different. I think it also says like how much you've grown as an author. Like that is a
Yeah.
very difficult book to write. Like, well, the whole series. I don't think 10 years ago you would have been able to write that. So let's see where you go from here on. But I mean,
Um, yeah, I
that was a
certainly.
massive feat, and you accomplished it. So
Thank
well
you.
done.
Thank you. It is. I did take a quantum leap, and I had to. It's one of those books that I had to write in order to learn how to write it, and then once I'd finally learned how to write it, I could kind of go back
Mm,
and get it to the level it was supposed to be at. But yeah, I certainly am a different writer at the end of having undergone that experience,
mm.
and a better
Yes.
writer, right the way across the board.
And before we get to your upcoming book, I also need to remind people, those who don't know, that you also have Run to Ground and The Final Cut, um, both
Quiet
amazing
places
books. Sorry?
and quiet places.
Quiet Places, good grief. Like, see, an amazing body of work. Quiet Places, what drew me in immediately was I'm a big fan of um, 1890s to 1910
Oh yeah.
Ambrosi Bierce. We had Lovecraft, we had Poe. I'm not sure about their timing. Um, who was with Bierce as well? There was another guy.
Algernon Blackwood
Yes,
and
that's it.
Arthur Machen as well.
S-
They're all kind of like forebears. They sort of sit just between Poe and
mm,
Lovecraft. Um, Robert W. Chambers is another.
yes.
And yeah, I would like to think it kind of sits in that category
Mm,
too. My
yes.
work has often been called cosmic horror, and it much fits in that category. But I think I lean less on Lovecraft, which is not to diminish Lovecraft's massive impact and influence on the genre, in spite of the more questionable elements of his work. But I think I lean more on the same sources that Lovecraft drew on, perhaps than Lovecraft as a writer. I kind of go back to like the source of Lovecraft in
Mm,
fiction, and I like to think I take it. Although it's obviously highly cosmic, I like to think I take it in a different direction than writers working in the Lovecraftian niche.
mm. No, true. Now those were all of well, all of your work. That and
Thank you.
even with Quiet Places being like, oh, okay, so this is very much like Algernon Blackwood. These guys, it went like a whole cosmic direction, like halfway through, which was amazingly done. Okay, so the book that we talked about was Armed and Dangerous. So that is your next book out, I believe, in early next year, in a few months. I'll have to go check the dates, but
I don't
yes.
think we've got a release date just yet. And
Let's
yeah,
see.
we have to put together a whole marketing
Mm.
strategy for which I have a few ideas. But obviously, we'll talk about that later. Yeah, Harmed and Dangerous is a little bit of a detour for me in my career. It's not entirely a piece of cosmic horror. It's a paranormal Southern Gothic thriller. It uh, it tells the story of a 17-year-old adopted girl called Kyra Hughes. She has grown up in Chicago in a very nice upper middle class family, but she knows she's been adopted, and she's been in search of her adopted parents. She has problems with anxiety, problems with anger, problems with depression, and she feels that she needs to go in search of her adopted parents. She's also completely obsessed with serial killers and with kind of the whole serial killer vibe, and one serial killer in particular who operated in the small Cajun town of Yeovil in Louisiana. Um, uh, Halfway into discovering who her adopted parents were, she actually discovers, even though she's planning a blog on Billy Ray Johnson, who is the serial killer that she's utterly fascinated with, that her um, birth mother was the final victim of her favorite serial killer. This sends her slightly off the edge, and she ditches school. She runs away from home, doesn't tell her parents where she was going, travels down to Louisiana, the home of her birth, to try and reconnect with her past and wrestle with these demons that she feels are haunting her by learning a little more about her birth mother. While she's there, she starts having these strange psychic experiences. She, when she stands in a certain place at a certain time, the world around her disappears, and what she sees is not the 21st century that she existing in. She sees the world as it was exactly 15 years ago. So while she's standing physically in 2025, she's seeing the world way back in 2010 as it was. So everywhere she looks, it's 2010, even though she's physically.
Mhm.
And she finds not only that, but there is some force, some strange presence which is taken over and takes over her body and forces her to walk in certain places. And as she walks past her at one point and manages to catch sight of a reflection, she sees Billy Ray Johnson's um, face reflected in a window of an empty shop. And she realizes that she's actually seeing the world through Billy Ray Johnson's eyes 15 years ago. But worse than that, Billy Ray Johnson is actually stalking a woman. And the woman he's stalking is Kyra's birth mother. And the woman she's stalking is pushing around a very small child in a pram, which is herself. She's being forced to watch through the eyes of the serial killer who murdered her mother as he stalks her mother and herself at aged 18 months.
Wow.
It gets a little bit weirder than that because while at first she's able to connect with a lot of completely repressed memories about her mother, and she's given this weird opportunity to reconnect with her mother in the strangest
Mm.
under the strangest circumstances, she begins to discover that her mother, Caitlin Robichaud, was in fact actually a terrible, abusive parent who massively mistreated Kyra. And a lot of Kyra's demons are coming from this completely suppressed abuse and this trauma that she knew nothing about. And the abuse that she witnesses through Billy Ray Johnson's eyes as Billy Ray Johnson stalks her mother gets so worse. At one point, she can't stand to watch it anymore. She forces Billy Ray to turn away. And she realizes that the control that Billy Ray has over her physically when she goes into these like experiences, like
Mm.
fugue states, cuts both ways. She can control him just as he's controlling her. At this point, she realizes that if she can control him, even though all these events took place 15 years ago, then she could potentially save her birth mother from death at the hands of Billy Ray Johnson. But if she does so, she will um, effectively sentence herself to a lifetime at the hands of an abusive mother. And she will never know the love of the adopted parents who took her
Mm.
on. So she's stuck with this dilemma. Does Does she save her mother, even though she's condemning herself to a lifetime of abuse? Or does she basically give in to the anger and the hatred that's just been released when she's witnessing this abuse, and actually stand and watch as Billy Ray Johnson murders her mother? And this is where
No,
the story takes off.
I Jasper, I love how your mind works, because no, that is just awesome. Um, so I think if anyone is new coming to your work, Bark Bites Horror,
Mhm.
they're in for one hell of a journey. Like, I would recommend
I hope so.
just like diving into your work and reading all of them straight through. It's a body of work worth exploring. It's like
Thank you.
a nice deep ocean that someone's never like traversed, whatever the word is, and it's just there waiting for you. Now that is awesome. Um, well, I think that's pretty much all of it covered.
Well,
So after Armed and Dangerous, what's next?
um, uh, well, interestingly, I, I work on two big projects. Um, one of which is called "The House That Hunted Tortured Souls." Um, this is most haunted. It's a haunted house story of a kind you've never read before. Most haunted house stories involve a house which is haunted by the spirits of deceased people. This is a story about two ghosts who are running away from a house which is effectively stalking and haunting them. Um, it's also linked into to the stories about the Kurum Sadik heresy, which is
Mm,
a mythology which links a lot of my work and expands that, and expands on some of the mythology behind Draw You in unexpected ways. The other one is I we mentioned Stuck on You. I should just mention that Stuck on You actually is available. You can read it for free if you sign up to my mailing list, and I'm sure Joe will put a link to
mm-hmm,
that in the bottom
for
here. You get
sure.
that free, but you also get a story written by Linda Corrigan, the main protagonist of Draw You In as well, called Doom Divine, Vain Glorious Love, which is a prequel to the horror series that Linda actually works upon in Draw You In. And that's had an incredibly good response from my mailing list subscribers. People are wanting more from that series. So, while that's currently a free, quite long novella, I'm probably going to expand that into a novel
Oh,
um,
nice.
about the main protagonist. Um, so that would be another. Obviously, I wrote the novella in collaboration with my character, and she'll probably want a credit and a collaborative input into expanding that out. That
Mm,
takes vampires and the concept of vampirism into areas that you've never quite seen before, in ways that you haven't quite experienced. Blood sucking.
oh, no, brilliant. I can't wait. So, yes. Um, any last words for, let's say, for advice for authors out there, fellow creators?
My best piece of advice, actually, and this is also a really good life hack. When you sit down to write, um, turn off all notifications on this and every other device you're writing on. I know we all love these things bleeping away and like begging for our attention, but effectively, their main purpose is to steal our time and steal our attention.
Mm-hmm.
And for an author, the two most important commodities that we have are time and attention. And you don't want a horrible little small child, like some mad, like Ritalin addled, like toddler, tugging away constantly at your arm, or your kind of face, or your attention, while it's basically to write. So turn off notifications on every single device around you, or literally pick them up and go and put them in another building, the one in which you're working. If you turn off all notifications on a device for good, um, Your family and friends will get very annoyed by you because you won't instantly respond in a Pavlovian sense the minute they text you. But I can't begin to tell you the positive impact this will have on your life. However, for many people, they might find that a bit impossible. But if you're working, turn off all your notifications while you work and give yourself that space to just mentally breathe and to concentrate on what you're working on. It doesn't matter if it's for an hour, if it's for 2 hours. We all snatch whatever time we possibly can during the course of our very busy lives to sit down and have the stillness and the calm and the quiet to concentrate on our work. But this is all helped by turning off those notifications. Trust me on this.
Yeah.
It will improve your writing in ways you haven't yet considered.
No, I agree. I think it's the same as when you're reading. You should be so into the story that you don't realize you're reading a book. So as an author,
Exactly.
you should forget about I'm a human being sitting here writing a book. There's a distraction. There's a distraction. You need to be 100% in the
Yeah.
story, in your character. It's like what do you call it? A method actor, just
Mm,
like 100% in the moment. So no, that is awesome.
yeah. Stephen King calls it staring through the page.
Mm,
To get effectively when we fall asleep at night, we have like effectively 2 sleep cycles, are roughly rounded about 4 hours each. And in each sleep cycle, we have between 10 to 30 minutes of deep sleep, and that's the sleep that we really need. That's the recuperative sleep that does all the really important resetting of our body
mm,
physically and emotionally, and everything else is sort of just gravy. And when we're writing, you'll tend to find you're trying to get yourself into a trance so that the outside world disappears. And to begin with, you will get distracted by the books on your bookshelf. You will, even if you turn off your notifications, go and check any number of social media platforms just in case, and then you'll have to keep dragging yourself back. But roughly about an hour to 2 hours into the concentrated effort of what you're doing, you probably fall into this trance of what neurodivergent people or people with ADHD call hyperfocus. You don't have to be neurodivergent on the spectrum to achieve hyperfocus. You just need to concentrate, like
mm,
falling into a trance for a very long time, and you'll get into the state. And you'd have written about 2, 3, 400 words over the last hour till you drop into this hyperfocus state. And then you'll do the majority of your writing. You'll do 1,000 words before you kind of realize it. And eventually you kind of lose this state, like you lose deep sleep, and you'll kind of come out. Suddenly the world around you will become interesting. And if you keep at it for a very long period of time, 4, 5, 6 to 8 hours, you'll fall back into that state again. And that's where you write 1,000 words in half an hour.
mm,
Um, and some people can keep this up for hours on end. They're very strange. They're not like the rest of us. For the rest of us, we hit this golden moment of pure, absolutely focused, intense creativity for a brief period of time, and then everything before or afterwards is an attempt to kind of fall back into it or kind of surface from it.
mm. And
Um,
it's like going to the gym. If you do it every day, you get there faster, it gets easier.
yes.
That's how I wrote my Shadows and Ink books. It was throughout November, December, January. I think I wrote the first one, and I wrote from 5 to 7 every morning before I knew anyone else would get up. No one would phone me, send me messages, whatever. It was just complete concentration. And after that first month of just getting used to it, the second and third month, I was flying through that book. Like,
Yeah,
really.
writing is a marathon, and uh, a good schedule and a good routine really help. And your routine will be entirely unique to you, but
Mm,
try and get a routine. Early hours of the morning are a really good time to write, whether that's last thing at night. If you happen to be a bit of a night owl, not many people are. Most of us are quite exhausted, but I know a lot of writers who write really well, kind of when everyone else is asleep, or a lot of writers get up ridiculously early when everyone else is still asleep. I think it's something to do with that mental airspace being uncluttered by kind of other conscious people. Gives you
Mm,
a bit more space for your mind to expand. That sounds very metaphysical, but I think there's something in it. Um, but wherever in your schedule, in a daily thing, you can find a moment. There's loads more time than you actually think there is.
mm,
No matter how busy your life is, put aside if it's only half an hour, if it's 10 minutes, doesn't matter. Sit down and force yourself to write like a minimum word count. It could be 100 words a day, or it can be 2,000 words a day. That's dependent upon your schedule and you. But makes if you try and write 5 out of 7 days every single week and set yourself a minimum word count, no matter how small or how large, and stick to it, you will be astonished by what you can achieve in a short space of time.
no, I
Um,
agree.
yeah, but
And
a dedicated continual application is
mm,
the only way you get through the marathon effort necessary mentally and emotionally, as physically as well
true.
to write.
I can't remember who said this, but one of my favorite sayings is we tend to overestimate how much we can do in one day, but we underestimate how much you can do in a week, a month, or a
Yeah,
year. Just because you didn't get to something today doesn't mean tomorrow's just going to be just as hectic. Like
yeah.
if something comes
And
up
the other
today, to tomorrow,
Mhm.
give that thing more attention. Like this week, next month, the whole year. And I mean, look, you wrote a book in 2 years that I think would have, well, 3 books that would have taken some people 8 or 9 years to write. Definitely. And
Yeah.
I've read the book. So
It doesn't take you 8 or 9 years to read, promise you, if you're reading
mm,
at home. It's quite a quick read.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jasper. And
Thank you for having me.
anytime, I want to say anytime, every time, everywhere, that movie. But because it's always worthwhile if there's a new interview, if there's a new book, if anywhere you appear, um, fans like me will be there because it's
Thank you.
always worth it. And to anyone who wants to read Jasper's books, I'll put the links below in the description, and check out the videos appearing on our sides here to go and check out some of Jasper's comics or other interviews. Thank you, Shadow Dwellers. See
Thank
you
you.
around.